Welcome, everybody, to On This Day on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. I'm your host for On This Day, Mike Goodpaster. And today, on this day, January the 4th, 1976, the Pittsburgh Steelers beat the Oakland Raiders 16-10 to win the 1975 AFC Championship and move on to the Super Bowl. Now, Al Davis didn't buy Commissioner Pete Rozell's attempt to soothe his anger for a second. It seems that the Raiders owner was sure Pittsburgh had intentionally iced the sidelines inside Three Rivers Stadium in the 24 hours leading up to the 1975 AFC Championship game. Now, Pete Rozell told Al Davis it's the same for both teams. And legend has it that the tarp that covered the Three Rivers Stadium turf leaked the night before the game. Coincidentally, it rained that night, and the rain that seeped through the tarp froze into ice by the following morning. While the entire field was compromised, the worst part of the field was outside of the hash marks. The ice sidelines made for a treacherous day for wide receivers in regards to not only being productive, but staying safe against the physical defenders of both the Steelers and the Raiders. And if you remember, the Oakland Raiders were a vertical passing team, so outside the hashes is where they made their money. And this really limited what they could do. And, you had ice sidelines, 18-degree weather, neutralized both teams' passing attacks. Davis and the Raiders always felt that Steelers purposely froze the field to stonewall Oakland's vertical passing attack, led by Ken Stabler and receivers Cliff Branch and Fred Biletnikoff. Branch had victimized Pittsburgh a year earlier in the AFC Championship in Oakland, hauling in 9 passes for 186 yards and a touchdown that saw him beat Hall of Famer defensive back Mel Blount, who for my money is the greatest corner in NFL history. Now the ice and the Steelers defense held Oakland's passing game in check. Stabler suffered through an 18 of 42 passing day that included 2 picks, both by Steelers safety Mike Wagner. Branch was held to just 2 catches on 56 yards. And Branch later would tell the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, every time I'd take off, I'd slip. The coverage wasn't a problem, it was the field. Now, the field wasn't as big a problem for the Steelers receiver, Lynn Swann. The Raiders' vicious secondary was led by Jack Tatum and George Atkinson, and it was Atkinson's forearm to Swann's head that knocked number 88 out of the game, leading to the iconic scene of Joe Green, bat arm and all, trying to carry the unconscious Swann off the field. Now, ironically, it would be another Steelers wide receiver that would deliver the critical blow. While the Steelers were ahead 3-0 early in the fourth quarter, John Stallworth took out 2 Raiders that freed up Franco Harris on his 25-yard touchdown run, giving the Steelers a seemingly insurmountable 10-0 lead because nobody could do anything on this field passing-wise. But Oakland immediately trims the deficit to 10-7, and then Stallworth again pulls down a 20-yard touchdown pass from Terry Bradshaw that appeared to put the game on ice. Bad play on words, huh? Now, Bradshaw said the elements were the big factor. It was slippery. We were frozen. I was losing the feeling in my fingers from early on in the game. Now, despite the 9-point deficit at 16-7 in the horrid conditions, the Raiders, as the Raiders always did, they battled back. And as the late Dwight White said years later, you never went to bed early during a Raiders game. Now, after kicking a field goal to inch closer at 16-10, Oakland got one last chance at victory with seconds remaining, but Stabler's 37-yard pass to Branch on the game's final play fell 15 yards short of the end zone. The contest was basically a hockey game in cleats that featured 12 turnovers, 12 punts, and bad feelings from the Raiders that continue to this day. Now, over 40 years later, the question still lingers whether or not the Steelers intentionally froze the field prior to the game. If the Steelers did indeed freeze the field, would it have been poetic justice? We're talking about the Raiders, after all, the team that played with hard-molded cast as pads. And John Madden's motto was, rule number 1, cheating is encouraged. Rule number 2, see rule number 1. Now, for the record, I don't think Pittsburgh iced the field intentionally. I think the Steelers were one of the proudest teams in NFL history, led by guys like Joe Green, Andy Rassel, Terry Bradshaw, L.C. Greenwood. I don't think they thought they needed an advantage. I don't think they were worried about needing an advantage. And if you look at this, the Steelers and Raiders rivalry during the 70s was one of the greatest in all of sports history. And when the day is done, Pittsburgh won this game 16-10 to move on to the Super Bowl and to win another Super Bowl. The Oakland Raiders were a team that during the 70s, outside of the 1970, 76 season, Super Bowl 11, they never got it done when they had to face this team. And, there's a lot to be said for that. So if you're an Oakland Raiders fan, you lost to Pittsburgh. You lost to them in 72, controversially. 76, the Raiders did beat the Steelers 24-7 in the AFC Championship game, but that was without, the Steelers were playing banged up, no Blyer, Franco Harris, the guys that were playing were injured, but they got that game in 1976, won the Super Bowl. The Oakland Raiders, one of the greatest teams of all time, one of the greatest offensive lines of all time. Ken Stabler was a stud, but they're a level below the Pittsburgh Steelers in the history of the NFL. Because in the 1970s, no team was better than the Pittsburgh Steelers. And it's debatable whether there's been a team better than the Pittsburgh Steelers since then. Now, I think that this Pittsburgh Steelers team, at worst, is one of the top 3 or 4 teams in NFL history. And I think there is a huge case to be made that they're number one. And on this day, January the 4th, 1976, the Pittsburgh Steelers beat the Oakland Raiders 16-10. And if the Steelers were cheating, you got to think that maybe since Al Davis and John Madden had the motto that, you're supposed to cheat, maybe they should just shut up. Because in the end, whether they cheated or not, the Pittsburgh Steelers won. The Pittsburgh Steelers got a Super Bowl ring, and the Oakland Raiders got nothing on this year. The next year would be different, but in 1975, the Pittsburgh Steelers were the king of the AFC and the king of the NFL. All right, guys, you've been listening to On This Day on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. I want to remind you can hear On This Day every day on the Grueling Truth Sports Network. Follow us at Grueling Truth on Twitter. You can hear all of our shows on iHeartRadio, iTunes, TuneIn, Spreaker, Stitcher, Spotify, wherever you find podcasts. You'll find the Grueling Truth. So, this has been Mike Goodpaster. You've been listening to the Grueling Truth, where the legends speak.